Lucy Letby is accused of the murder of
7 babies and the attempted murder of 10 others.
While she was working on the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital.
Letby denies all of the charges over the incidents.
Lucy Letby was the only person working on the night shift. It was alleged in court that their mother was apparently told by Miss Letby, "Trust me, I'm a nurse."
This is a podcast about one of the most anticipated criminal trials for years. It involves the most shocking of allegations: the alleged murders and attempted murders of tiny, premature babies at the hands of a neonatal nurse whose very job it was to look after them.
Lucy Letby is on trial at Manchester Crown Court, accused of killing 7 infants and injuring 10 more at the Countess of Chester Hospital in Cheshire.
In total, there are 22 charges, all of which she denies.
I'm Liz Hull, Northern correspondent for the Mail. I will be in court to report on the case as it develops.
And I'm Caroline Cheetham, a broadcast journalist. Every week on this podcast, we'll examine what's happened and bring you the details behind the headlines.
This is the trial of Lucy Letby.
The case against Lucy Letby is that she murdered or tried to kill 17 babies while she was working as a neonatal nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital in the northwest of England. She denies the charges.
The babies in this trial are not being named for legal reasons, and the identities of their families are also being protected. They're known only as babies A to Q.
7 of the babies died. 10 survived. Each one of these babies was or is someone's son or daughter, and the mums, dads and families of every baby are present in court, listening to every detail of how their child was allegedly killed or harmed.
We'll be bringing you that detail as the jury is hearing it from the prosecution and defence. We're getting behind the headlines to explain far more than the news reports you'll be reading, watching and listening to. And the importance of a fair trial is paramount, so we won't be getting into anything in this podcast that the jury have not been told, because they are the 12 people who have to decide the outcome of this case. And in this episode, we're not focusing on a baby, we're actually focusing on the hospital itself. Welcome to episode 19, An Association.
So, Liz, we should explain at the outset that it's Friday, and we're not normally recording this on a Friday, but we're doing this on a Friday this week because it's been a significant week in court. So we wanted to bring you all up to speed with what's been happening.
That's right, Caroline. We're still going to devote Monday's episode to the next baby in the case, baby K, like we always do. But in the last couple of days, the evidence we've heard in court took a different turn. It's focused a bit more on the wider workings of the hospital and on 2 doctors in the neonatal unit who were getting worried.
In fact, Liz, it's the first time we've heard evidence that doctors were starting to wonder if these events, as they call them, babies becoming suddenly ill, babies developing unusual rashes, babies dying, were linked in some way.
Yes, and it's the first time the courts heard that there were some people on the unit who were starting to think the unthinkable, to wonder if a pattern was emerging, and if there was a pattern, whether it was significant.
We'll also outline today how doctors who first noticed this pattern, which has been described in court as an association between Lucy Letby and the babies in the case, spotted it as early as June 2015 after the first 3 children were allegedly killed.
And how they said their concerns were repeatedly raised with senior hospital managers, but were ignored for up to 8 months, leaving Lucy Letby free to allegedly murder at least 2 babies and harm 6 more before she was finally removed from the ward.
So, Liz, we need to go back a bit to June 2015 to the death of baby D, which we covered back in episode 6, because this was the point at which one doctor on the unit started to look a little more deeply at what was going on.
Baby D had been born around 37 weeks, so she was almost full term, but a delay in getting her mother antibiotics in labour meant she was admitted to the neonatal unit with an infection.
Now, although she was poorly, Liz, and on a ventilator to help her breathe initially, jurors were told that she was considered to be stable.
But the following night, baby D collapsed 3 times and stopped breathing. First at 1:30 a.m, then 90 minutes later at 3 a.m, and finally at 4 a.m. A doctor and nurses who gave evidence to the court said they saw a rash on her tummy while they were giving her CPR, which they described as unusual.
And it's the prosecution case that these 3 collapses were because Lucy Letby had deliberately attacked her, finally killing her by injecting air into her bloodstream.
And baby D was pronounced dead at 4:30 a.m. on June the 22nd, 2015. Now, the jury's been told that she was the 3rd baby to die on the unit in the space of just over a fortnight. You might remember a twin boy, baby A, had died on June the 8th, followed by another boy, baby C, 6 days later on June the 14th, followed by baby D 8 days later on June the 22nd.
And so it was after the 3rd death of baby D that Dr. Stephen Breary, now he was the consultant in charge of the neonatal unit, decided to carry out what he called an informal review of what had happened. Now, we outlined in the previous episode that Dr. Breary discussed these findings with Dr. Ravi Jayaram. He's another consultant who is in charge of the neighbouring children's ward, and someone who appears quite a lot on the TV. You might see him on This Morning and on The One Show.
Yes, Dr. Jayaram told jurors it wasn't a formal review, but he and Dr. Breary had discussed the findings. He said the conversation reflected on the fact that Dr. Breary had noticed Lucy Letby had been on duty and looking after those babies. He said that she was present. In court, Lucy Letby's barrister, Ben Myers KC, pushed Dr. Jayaram on whether she'd been identified by Dr. Breary as a person of interest at that time. Dr. Jayaram said it was more of an association and told Mr. Myers that other colleagues had noticed this association too. And under cross-examination, Dr. Jayaram conceded that all eyes were on Lucy Letby from that point onwards.
So, Liz, all this took place in June 2015, but it wasn't until 4 months later, in October that same year, that this association or link between Lucy Letby and the poorly babies was first raised with hospital management.
Yes, now, jurors weren't told exactly when in October Dr. Jayaram and Dr. Breary went to hospital managers to talk about their findings. But you might remember that it's the prosecution case that, at the end of October, Lucy Letby murdered baby I.
We covered baby I back in episode 14, but Liz, just remind us what the court heard about her.
So she was a very premature baby girl who was born at 27 weeks when her mother's waters broke 13 weeks early. She weighed just 2 pounds 2 ounces, around the same size as a bag of sugar, and doctors warned her parents that she'd be in hospital for a while.
So she was being treated, but she was making progress, and the prosecution say she was expected to survive. It's their case that baby I died because she was attacked 4 times by Lucy Letby, by having air or gas injected into her feeding tube. And you might recall in the hours after her death, Lucy Letby offered to bathe her for her parents, and later she sent a sympathy card to the family.
So the court heard that at some point in October, this association between Lucy Letby and these unexpected deaths and collapses that Dr. Breary and Dr. Jayaram had been discussing back in June was escalated.
Yes, the consultants were starting to wonder if these events, as they call them on the unit, babies becoming suddenly ill, babies developing unexplained rashes, and babies dying, were linked in some way. So, Liz, who was told what?
So in his evidence to the court this week, Dr. Jayaram said that specifically the Director of Nursing was alerted at this stage. Now, she wasn't named in court, but we understand she no longer works at the Countess.
And what happened once the concerns had been referred up the hospital chain in October?
Dr. Jayaram said the initial response from managers was, "It's unlikely, we'll see." So the court heard that, in a nutshell, nothing happened.
So, Liz, that was in October 2015. And another 4 months passed, and in February 2016, another baby, baby K, suddenly collapsed on the neonatal unit less than 2 hours after she was born. Now, due to her extreme prematurity, she was eventually transferred out of the Countess to the more specialist centre at Arrow Park Hospital on the Wirral, where she sadly died aged just 3 days.
Now, we'll outline her story in detail on Monday, but it's the prosecution case that Lucy Letby caused her collapse because she tampered with the ventilator tube helping her breathe. It's important to say they do not allege that Lucy Letby was to blame for her death.
But for Dr. Jayaram, baby K's collapse was pivotal, Liz, because he told jurors he suspected that he interrupted Lucy Letby when she was in the middle of attacking her. The court heard Lucy Letby was babysitting baby K because her designated nurse, Jo Williams, had asked her to keep an eye on the baby while she nipped away from the nursery for a few minutes to update the parents.
But Dr. Jayaram said that because of the association that had already been made between Lucy Letby and the previous collapses and deaths, he felt extremely uncomfortable when he realised she was alone in Nursery 1 with baby K, so went to investigate.
Dr. Jayaram told the court he went to check mainly to reassure himself that he was being ridiculous.
But when he arrived, baby K's oxygen levels were dropping dangerously low. Her monitor was not alarming, and Lucy Letby was standing next to her incubator, doing nothing, he said. This exchange between prosecuting barrister Philip Asprey and Dr. Jayaram has been voiced by actors. It begins with Dr. Jayaram.
I will admit it seemed entirely irrational and illogical. Jo told me she was going and Lucy was there. I felt extremely uncomfortable. You can call me hysterical, you can call me irrational, but that's how I felt because of this association. Then the rational part of myself told me to stop being so ridiculous, and I kept doing what I was doing, but the thought kept coming back into my head. After 2.5 to 3 minutes, I got up to check on baby K to prove to myself that I needed to stop being ridiculous and irrational, and of course everything was going to be okay. I had not been called to review baby K, and I had not got up because I heard alarms going off. I went up to Nursery 1 and walked in.
What, if anything, did you see?
As I walked up, I saw Lucy Letby standing by the incubator and the ventilator. She didn't have her hands in the incubator. I saw her, and then I looked up at the monitor, and baby K's sats were in the 80s, and they continued to drop. The ventilator was not alarming, and the incubator was not alarming. The monitor is set to alarm when the sats drop below 90%. I recall saying, "What's happening?" And Lucy looked and said something along the lines of, "She's having a desaturation."
What, if anything, was she doing?
Nothing. I wasn't aware she was looking at the monitor. She was facing more towards me, but didn't say anything to me until I asked her what was happening.
Any more conversation between the two of you?
We switched into professional mode.
So the allegation, Liz, which we'll hear more about on Monday, is that Lucy Letby had deliberately dislodged baby K's breathing tube while Nurse Williams was momentarily away, causing her collapse.
And Dr. Jayaram told the court that the circumstances of baby K's collapse prompted he and Dr. Breary to raise their concerns a second time to hospital managers. This time, the court heard, they took their concerns to the medical director as well.
Dr. Jayaram told the court that Dr. Breary even asked for a meeting between the consultants and hospital managers to discuss their concerns, but they were ignored and the pair faced pressure not to make a fuss, Dr. Jayaram said.
No one came back to the consultants for another 3 months, Dr. Jayaram claimed, and he told jurors that, in hindsight, he wished he'd bypassed official channels and gone straight to the police himself.
In court, Mr. Myers suggested it was difficult to believe that if Dr. Jayaram had witnessed what he said he had with baby K and really suspected someone was harming babies on his unit, that he hadn't done precisely that. Their robust exchange in court, which starts with Mr. Myers, has been voiced by actors.
You have a duty to look after children on your unit. If you think someone is deliberately harming them, you do your best to protect them.
I did my best by raising concerns to senior executive level medical management. Concerns were first raised by my colleague Dr. Breary. In February, we raised them again.
Lucy Letby continued to work on this department for another 4 months or so?
That's correct.
If you thought there was someone actively involved in harming on the unit, were you not able to raise it with the police?
If I may take a step back, we had significant concerns. From the autumn of 2015, we escalated concerns. They were on the radar of someone as senior as the Executive Director of Nursing as far back as October 2015. As clinicians, we put our faith in the system, in senior management to escalate concerns and investigate them. The initial response was, "It's unlikely that anything is going on, we'll see what happens." We said, "Okay," against our better judgment in retrospect. We flagged up again to the medical director and the director of nursing that we had concerns. My colleague, Dr. Stephen Breary, requested a meeting with them. They didn't respond to that for another 3 months. We were stuck because we had concerns and didn't know what to do. In retrospect, I wish we had bypassed them and gone straight to the police. We by no means were playing judge and jury at any point, but the association was becoming clearer and clearer. We were in an unprecedented situation. No one trains us for this. We were not thinking, could this be deliberate harm? Eventually, we reached a point in June 2016 when we said something has got to change, but that's not for me to talk about now.
So, Liz, just to be clear, what Dr. Jayaram is saying is concerns were raised with senior hospital managers, the Director of Nursing and the Medical Director, first in October 2015, then again in February 2016, but it was another 4 months before Lucy Letby stopped working on the ward.
And in that time, it is alleged Lucy Letby attacked 8 more babies, murdering 2 of them, including 2 of 3 identical triplets. Their cases are due to be outlined by the prosecution in a couple of weeks' time.
Lucy Letby denies all the charges against her. We'll be back on Monday, as usual, to explain in more detail what the prosecution say happened to baby Kay. She was a premature baby girl who Lucy Letby is accused of trying to murder.
I'll be in court to listen to the evidence, and you can read my daily reports in the Mail and on Mail Plus.
You can also follow us on Twitter @Lucy Letby Trial, or send us an email at thetrialoflucyletby@gmail.com.
And we'll both be back next week. See you then.
Lucy Letby is accused of the murder of
7 babies and the attempted murder of 10 others.
While she was working on the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital.
Letby denies all of the charges over the incidents.
Lucy Letby was the only person working on the night shift. It was alleged in court that their mother was apparently told by Miss Letby, "Trust me, I'm a nurse."
This is a podcast about one of the most anticipated criminal trials for years. It involves the most shocking of allegations, the alleged murders and attempted murders of tiny, premature babies at the hands of a neonatal nurse whose very job it was to look after them.
Lucy Letby is on trial at Manchester Crown Court, accused of killing 7 infants and injuring 10 more at the Countess of Chester Hospital in Cheshire.
In total, there are 22 charges, all of which she denies.
I'm Liz Hull, Northern correspondent for the Mail. I will be in court to report on the case as it develops.
And I'm Caroline Cheetham, a broadcast journalist. Every week on this podcast, we'll examine what's happened and bring you the details behind the headlines.
This is the trial of Lucy Letby.
The case against Lucy Letby is that she murdered or tried to kill 17 babies while she was working as a neonatal nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital in the northwest of England. She denies the charges.
The babies in this trial are not being named for legal reasons, and the identities of their families are also being protected. They're known only as babies A to Q.
7 of the babies died. 10 survived. Each one of these babies was or is someone's son or daughter, and the mums, dads and families of every baby are present in court, listening to every detail of how their child was allegedly killed or harmed.
We'll be bringing you that detail as the jury is hearing it from the prosecution and defence. We're getting behind the headlines to explain far more than the news reports you'll be reading, watching and listening to. And the importance of a fair trial is paramount, so we won't be getting into anything in this podcast that the jury have not been told, because they are the 12 people who have to decide the outcome of this case.
The jury's hearing about each baby in turn, and they've been told 12 babies were allegedly killed or harmed by Lucy Letby between June 2015 and April 2016.
So today, Caroline, in this episode, we're focusing on the 13th baby in the case. Now, she was an extremely premature baby girl who the prosecution say Lucy Letby tried to murder by deliberately dislodging her breathing tube less than 2 hours after she was born, causing her to collapse.
We'll also be telling how a senior doctor suspected he interrupted her in the act.
Welcome to episode 20, Baby K.
So baby K is one of the most premature babies involved in the case. Today we'll hear how, despite being born at just 25 weeks, she survived the birth. She was on the neonatal unit at the Countess for less than 11 hours before she was transferred to another hospital for more specialist care.
But despite the best efforts of medical staff, she deteriorated and sadly died aged just 3 days. The prosecution say that while Lucy Letby tried to murder her at the Countess less than 2 hours after she was born, she was not responsible for her subsequent death.
All right, so let's unpick what the jury were told about this very, very tiny baby, Liz.
So baby K weighed just 1 pound 8 ounces, and that's less than a bag of sugar when she was born after her mother went into spontaneous labour 15 weeks early in February 2016.
Now, we know from other episodes that the Countess wasn't supposed to look after babies born before 27 weeks. So why was her mother even there in the first place?
Well, she went to the Countess because it was her local hospital, and the jury was actually told that doctors actually looked into moving her to Arrow Park Hospital on the Wirral, which is, as we've heard, a level 3 centre more used to looking after very premature infants. But they didn't have any neonatal cots free when she went into labour, so she stayed in Chester instead. In a statement, she told the court what happened.
At the beginning of August 2015, I discovered I was 5, maybe 6 weeks pregnant. It was a planned natural pregnancy, and we were both thrilled with the news. The pregnancy progressed as normal. My husband and I attended all the scans and appointments together. When we attended the 12-week scan, an issue was identified with the baby. It was identified that the baby had a build-up of fluid at the back of her neck. At 15 weeks, I had an amniocentesis and was reassured everything was fine and there were no problems, and the test came back negative for Down syndrome. I was having regular checkups and scans every 2 to 3 weeks at the Countess. The fluid at the back of my baby's neck had begun to reduce. The only other problem was when we attended a scan at 18 to 20 weeks, where it was discovered our baby had a little pocket of fluid on her lungs. But during the next scan, it was clear, and the fluid at the back of her neck was reducing. Everything was developing fine, and my consultant had no concerns about me or my baby. It was a normal Monday, the day before I reached the 25-week point of my pregnancy. I woke up with what I can only describe as a few niggles and pains. I didn't think much about it and got into the shower to get ready for work. I called the midwife and explained how I was feeling. She told me to call the labour ward and they advised me to come in to be checked over. A midwife informed me I was 2 centimetres dilated. She informed my husband and I that something was happening and I had gone into labour. We couldn't believe it. I was admitted onto the labour ward and closely monitored over the next couple of days. The medical staff were talking about giving me steroid injections in case the labour progressed further to assist our baby and develop her lungs following delivery. The medical team started looking at the option of transferring me to another hospital that was equipped to deal with a 25-week delivery. Arrow Park on the Wirral was full and didn't have a vacant bed in the neonatal unit, so I remained at the Countess. On Tuesday around midnight, I woke up in pain. My husband pressed the red emergency alarm on the wall and within a minute the room was full of staff. Our daughter was born at 2:12 a.m. She was placed directly into an incubator and staff worked on her for 30 to 40 minutes. When I say worked, they were getting her breathing, clearing her airway, putting a hat on her and keeping her warm. As far as we were aware, there was nothing to be concerned about. We later found out she weighed 1 pound 8 ounces.
So baby K was born just after 2:10 in the morning, and Dr. Jayaram, the senior consultant who we heard a lot from last week in our bonus episode, was present at the birth. Now, he'd been called in by his more junior colleague, Dr. James Smith, and he told the court that baby K had actually been born in the breech position, which meant she was born feet first. She wasn't breathing and her heart rate was also low.
Yes, but he said this was quite normal for a baby of her 25-week gestation. Dr. Smith told jurors the doctors and nurses present immediately began to resuscitate her. They were helping her breathe by giving her oxygen through a mask, and within 2.5 minutes her heart rate was back up to over 100, which is about right for a small premature baby. And by 3 minutes she was trying to take breaths for herself. He told the court he thought the resuscitation had been a success.
Around half an hour later, at 2:40 a.m, after baby K had been stabilised, she was moved to the intensive care room of the neonatal unit, and she was intubated by Dr. Smith, which means he put a tube down her throat so she could be put on a ventilator to help her breathe.
She was also given some special medicine, Caroline, which is known as surfactant, and we've heard in previous episodes about this. It's often given to premature babies to help their lungs.
Now, baby K was placed in Nursery 1 in the care of nurse Joanne Williams, who was her designated nurse. Lucy Letby was on duty, but she was looking after 2 other babies in the room next door, which was Nursery 2.
Well, officially that's right, but jurors were shown medical records, which revealed it was actually Lucy Letby who booked her into the unit.
They were also shown swipe data. Now, that was from the electronic doors of the neonatal unit, which showed that at around 3:47 a.m, Nurse Williams left the unit and went up to the labour ward to update baby K's parents on her progress. Now, Liz, the prosecution say this moment is significant because Lucy Letby was left alone in Nursery 1 with baby K.
And we explained this in our bonus episode last Friday. Dr. Jayaram gave evidence that when he heard this, he was worried. He said that he'd been standing at the nurse's station writing his notes about baby K's birth when he began to feel, in his words, extremely uncomfortable. Now, this is because by this point, Dr. Jayaram and Dr. Stephen Breary had already been discussing what they called an association between Lucy Letby's presence and the sudden and unexpected deaths and collapses of several babies on the unit.
So knowing that Nurse Williams had gone upstairs, he told the court that he started to feel concerned about Lucy Letby being alone in Nursery 1, so he decided to go and check on baby K. Now, this exchange between Dr. Jayaram and the prosecuting barrister, Philip Asprey, in court is pretty dramatic, and it begins with Dr. Jayaram and has been voiced by actors.
Jo had told me she was going to the labour ward, and she told me that Lucy Letby was babysitting, keeping an eye on things. At this point, in mid-February, we were aware as a team of a number of unexpected and unusual events, and we were aware of an association with Lucy Letby. That's all we were aware of. No cause and effect had been ascribed. I will admit it seemed entirely irrational and illogical. Jo told me she was going, and Lucy was there. I felt extremely uncomfortable. You can call me hysterical, you can call me irrational, but that's how I felt because of this association. Then the rational part of myself told me to stop being so ridiculous, and I kept doing what I was doing, but the thought kept coming back into my head. After 2.5 to 3 minutes, I got up to check on baby K to prove to myself that I needed to stop being ridiculous and irrational, and of course everything was going to be okay. I had not been called to review baby K, and I had not got up because I heard alarms going off. I went up to Nursery 1 and walked in.
What, if anything, did you see?
As I walked up, I saw Lucy Letby standing by the incubator and the ventilator. She didn't have her hands in the incubator. I saw her, and then I looked up at the monitor, and baby K's sats were in the 80s, and they continued to drop. The ventilator was not alarming, and the incubator was not alarming. The monitor is set to alarm when the sats drop below 90%. I recall saying, "What's happening?" and Lucy looked and said something along the lines of, "She's having a desaturation."
What, if anything, was she doing?
Nothing. I wasn't aware she was looking at the monitor. She was facing more towards me, but didn't say anything to me until I asked her what was happening.
Any more conversation between the two of you?
We switched into professional mode. It didn't really make sense to me why the tube became dislodged. It had been secured, and baby K was not a vigorous baby. It's very difficult to dislodge an endotracheal tube without it being spotted. So I then removed the tube, which was not blocked, and put a face mask on to ventilate. As soon as we ventilated baby K, her chest began to move up and down without a huge amount of difficulty, and her SATs picked up.
Did Lucy Letby say anything during the course of the procedure?
Nothing that I remember.
So just to explain this a little bit more, Liz, Dr. Jayaram went into nursery 1 of his own accord because he was uncomfortable that Lucy Letby was there alone with baby K. He said no one had called for him and he hadn't heard an alarm sound to indicate a problem.
And he said when he entered the room, baby K's oxygen levels were below the level which would usually have set off the alarms, but none were sounding. And Lucy Letby, who was in the room alone with baby K standing by her cot, wasn't calling for help either, he said. Now, this is important, Caroline, because the prosecution say Lucy Letby had caused this collapse by deliberately dislodging her breathing tube in an attempt to kill her just moments before.
Dr. Jayaram told the jury that as soon as he realised baby K was struggling to breathe, he gave her rescue breaths with a mask and her saturations quickly picked up.
Yes, and once she'd been stabilised, Dr. Jayaram asked Dr. Smith to put a new, slightly bigger breathing tube into her throat so he could put her back on the ventilator. An X-ray taken at 6:07 showed this was in a satisfactory position.
3 minutes later, Lucy Letby, despite, remember, not being baby K's designated nurse, logged onto her medical notes and recorded that her breathing tube had been secured to her bonnet and retied.
But just 5 minutes later, her oxygen levels dropped again.
Dr. Jayaram said he pulled the breathing tube out of her mouth to see if it was in too far and the reason for her collapse.
Baby K settled, but around an hour later at 7:25 a.m, her blood pressure, heart rate and oxygen levels dropped again, and she needed cardiac compressions from the nurses to keep her circulation going. Again, Dr. Jayaram wrote in his notes that the breathing tube had slipped too far into her throat, and when he pulled it back, she picked up quite quickly, he said.
Soon afterwards, Lucy Letby finished her night shift as normal and she went home. Now, by this time, Liz, contact had been made with Arrow Park Hospital and arrangements were being made to transfer baby K for more specialist care.
Yeah, that's right. And the specialist transport team, who were called the Newts, arrived just before 9 a.m. It took several hours, though, before they got baby K stable enough to be moved into the incubator in the ambulance.
She eventually left the Countess at 12:40 p.m. that day, eventually arriving at Arrow Park at 1:15 in the afternoon.
The jury heard arrangements were made to discharge baby K's mother, and her parents followed not long afterwards. They were given a room at Ronald McDonald House, which is a specialist house on the hospital site that provides accommodation for parents of sick children.
But jurors were told that she was a very poorly baby because of her prematurity. Despite the best efforts of medical staff over the next 2 days, her condition deteriorated. When she was just 3 days old, her parents made the heartbreaking decision to take her off the machines which were keeping her alive.
In a statement, her mother described what happened.
I was lying awake in bed when I had the strangest feeling, which I cannot begin to describe. I quietly said to my husband, "Shall we go and see her?" As we walked into the room, I could see the monitors and SATs readings were low. I knew straight away things weren't great. There was a slim, dark-haired female doctor, and I looked at her and said, "She's not good, is she?" The doctor confirmed the worst and told us our daughter had been fighting all night and she had been debating whether to call us. She explained they had been trying to get her SATs readings up throughout the night, but we could see things weren't good. I asked if it was just a waiting game now or if she was going to get better. We had a long conversation and she said what happens next was entirely our decision. I remember saying to the doctor that she had been poked and prodded from the moment she was born. Her tiny little delicate body had swollen up so much. I didn't want her to be suffering anymore. We didn't want to be informed that we'd lost our little girl by alarms on the machines going off. We didn't want to prolong things anymore. We made the decision to switch off the machines and let her go. It was by far the hardest decision of my life. One of the staff showed us to a family room where it was peaceful and quiet. Our daughter was wrapped in a blanket and was wearing a little hat. She was placed into my husband's arms, and the doctor said to us, "We can do this whenever you are ready." The doctor removed the breathing pump and stepped out of the room and said they would return in 20 minutes. Our daughter was in my husband's arms when she took her last breath and silently passed away.
So, Liz, it's not the prosecution case that Lucy Letby was responsible for baby Kay's death at Arrow Park, but what they allege is that before she left the Countess, Lucy Letby tampered with baby Kay's breathing tube, causing her to collapse shortly before 4 a.m. on the 17th of February, just an hour and a half after her birth. But the defence say Lucy Letby did not harm her.
Mr. Myers said baby Kay's case was another example of a baby receiving suboptimal care at the Countess, and the probable or likely cause for the dislodgement of the tube was the baby inadvertently moving it herself. He said baby Kay should never have been born at the Countess in the first place. It wasn't supposed to look after babies born before 27 weeks, and she should have been treated at a more specialist level 3 unit like Arrow Park from the outset.
Dr. James Smith, who was present at baby Kay's birth, accepted that doctors at Arrow Park would have been more experienced at dealing with infants of baby Kay's prematurity, but he insisted level 2 neonatal units are equipped and have staff capable of stabilising before transportation of a baby of this gestation. And he also said the resuscitation had gone well.
Dr. Smith also agreed with Mr. Myers that antibiotics should have been given to baby Kay in the so-called golden hour. That's the 60 minutes after her birth, but that just did not happen.
He agreed that the fact antibiotics were given nearly 2.5 hours after her birth was suboptimal, but he insisted that blood tests showed there were no signs of immediate infection.
And Mr. Myers pointed to evidence given by nurse Jo Williams, who described baby Kay as an active baby after birth. She also said babies could sometimes dislodge feeding tubes accidentally with their own movement.
But she explained that nurses were careful to secure the tubes, which were clamped and tied to a bobble hat on their heads, and insisted that she would never have left baby Kay to update her parents without checking first that she was stable and that the tube was in place.
And Mr. Myers also asked Dr. Jayaram about this. He told the jury baby Kay was not a vigorous baby, although he accepted he hadn't put this in his police statement and had made a mistake when he said that she'd been sedated and unlikely to move at the time of her collapse.
Mr. Myers actually suggested to Dr. Jayaram that he added that detail to give the impression someone had interfered with the tube. But Dr. Jayaram insisted.
She was at 25-week gestation. She had been born and needed resuscitation, and she was not behaving in a way that we were worried that she would pull a tube out. At the point when Jo Williams left, she was stable, poorly but stable. She could move, but she was not making any purposeful movement. She was not a baby who was jumping around, so we were not concerned she would dislodge a tube.
When Lucy Letby was arrested by police, she was asked about baby Kay, and in court the prosecutor, Nick Johnson KC, read jurors a summary of what she told them.
She told detectives she only remembered baby Kay because she was tiny, and the Countess didn't usually take such premature babies.
She said she had no recollection of baby Kay's breathing tube becoming dislodged and agreed that Nurse Williams would never have left her unless she was stable and the tube correctly positioned.
And she said she would have raised the alarm if Dr. Jayaram had not walked in and thought it was possible that she was waiting to see if baby Kay self-corrected. Now, she explained that nurses sometimes didn't intervene straight away if a baby's oxygen levels were not dangerously low.
Later, she suggested to the police that maybe the tube had not been secured properly, and she denied doing anything to deliberately harm baby Kay.
Now, in case you missed our bonus episode on Friday, you can hear more detail about Dr. Jayaram's evidence to the court and the revelations about what managers at the hospital had been told by listening back.
He claimed he and Dr. Breary alerted the Director of Nursing to their concerns, which they referred to as an association as early as October 2015. They raised concerns again in February 2016. This time, they escalated them further by informing the medical director of the Countess as well.
Dr. Breary even asked for a meeting, but it's claimed that for 3 months he didn't even get a reply. It was actually another 4 months before Lucy Letby was removed from the ward. And you can hear the full heated exchange between Dr. Jayaram and Lucy Letby's barrister in episode 19. But this is part of what Dr. Jayaram told the court.
We had significant concerns. From the autumn of 2015, we escalated concerns. They were on the radar of someone as senior as the Executive Director of Nursing as far back as October 2015. As clinicians, we put our faith in the system, in senior management to escalate concerns and investigate them. The initial response was, "It's unlikely that anything is going on. We'll see what happens." We said, "Okay," against our better judgment in retrospect. We flagged up again to the medical director and the director of nursing that we had concerns. My colleague Dr. Stephen Breary requested a meeting with them. They didn't respond to that for another 3 months. We were stuck because we had concerns and didn't know what to do. In retrospect, I wish we had bypassed them and gone straight to the police. We by no means were playing judge and jury at any point, but the association was becoming clearer and clearer. We were in an unprecedented situation. No one trained us for this. We were not thinking, could this be deliberate harm? Eventually, we reached a point in June 2016 when we said something has got to change, but that's not for me to talk about now.
So that's it for episode 20. We'll be back again next week to tell you about baby N. Now, he was a premature baby boy, admitted to the neonatal unit because he was born with the blood clotting condition haemophilia.
It's the prosecution case that Lucy Letby tried to kill him 3 times on 2 separate shifts. They say he almost died because she thrust his feeding tube or another piece of medical equipment down his throat.
He was transferred to Alder Hey Children's Hospital where he recovered and survived. Lucy Letby denies harming him.
I'll be in court to listen to the evidence, and you can read my daily reports in the Mail and on Mail Plus.
You can also follow us on Twitter at Lucy Letby Trial, or send us an email at thetrialoflucyletby@gmail.com.
See you then.